Welcome to another lecture in the Aberystwyth Business School A-Level Business Lecture Series. Today I'm going to talk about the Tanenbaum and Schmidt Continuum of Leadership. This is content which is useful to support Level 3 business qualifications. My name is Tim Bennett-Gillison and I'm a lecturer in Business and Management in the Business School. What we intend to achieve with this lecture is firstly to understand Tanenbaum and Schmidt's continuum of leadership, then to compare the continuum with McGregor's theory of X and Y, and finally to appreciate the forces which determine a leader's position on the continuum. You've probably already come across the autocratic and democratic model of leadership, where we identify two styles, namely autocratic and democratic. Autocratic is characterized by the focus of power residing entirely with the leader or the manager. And remember, we're looking at leadership styles which managers may use when managing an organization, a team, etc. In the autocratic style, as I've said, the focus of power is entirely with the leader. The leader alone exercises control over policy, procedures, tasks, rewards, punishments, in fact, obviously, everything that is decided within the organisation. This is a style which is often, but not invariably, associated with owner-managers of organisations. The leader, perhaps as an entrepreneur, set up the organisation and sees little reason why he or she should involve other people in decision making. They own the place, they have total control, and therefore they choose to exercise that control. In stark contrast, the democratic style is characterised by the focus of power being devolved to the group, to the team, the workers in general. The leader is part of this team, but the group members have a much greater say in decision making. There are advantages and disadvantages to both of these styles. The autocratic style is often identified as being good in situations where strong leadership is required, where decisions need to be made urgently. Conversely, the democratic style offers numerous advantages, one of which, of course, is the fact that it brings a greater degree of expertise to the decision-making process. After all, why would the leader, the manager of a large organisation, know better about the details of manufacturing, advertising, accounting, than the people actually involved in those processes themselves? So there is a strong argument that the democratic style would lead to better decisions being made, and furthermore, it is always useful to boost morale because the group members actually feel involved, indeed are involved in the decisions that are made, and therefore feel more motivated to see those decisions through. The problem with this rather simple model of, on the other hand, one hand autocratic style, on the other hand democratic style, is that it's far too polarised. These are two extreme positions, completely opposite in their characteristics, and the real world is rarely as easily characterised as that. The real world is not as black and white as autocratic or democratic. There are shades of styles in between the two, and that is what we wish to explore with the continuum concept. We can put at either end of this continuum the autocratic style and the democratic style. We can characterise the autocratic style as tell. The workers, the group, the team are simply told what to do. The democratic style we could characterise as join. They join in the decision-making process. They are part of the implementation of that decision. And the Tanenbaum and Schmidt continuum connects these two extremes. It fills the gap with the idea of selling an idea or decision. On the way towards the democratic end, the idea of consulting. And we can divide this continuum into 7 relatively clear stages, although of course there will be grey areas even between those. At the end, which we've characterised as being analogous with the autocratic style, the leader makes the decision alone and tells the staff. There's no discussion, there's no negotiation, there's very little persuasion. They are told of the decision and what they need to do about it. Moving a little way along the continuum, the leader makes the decision alone, but sells it to the staff. In other words, is more persuasive, more explanatory perhaps, in the approach to convincing the staff that this is the right way forward, that this is what they need to do. Moving further along in the group of stages which we might call consultation or consult, the leader presents the ideas and asks for questions from the staff. So we have the beginnings of a discussion, the beginnings of a dialogue, although at this stage it's unlikely that the ideas will be modified to any significant degree by feedback from the staff, but at the very least the staff are allowed to question the reasonings behind the decisions, the details of their implementation, and so on. The next stage is to present a tentative decision, but the decision is subject to change. So in the light of comments, questions and so on from the team, from the staff, the decision may be modified. So we're getting a real dialogue here. The decision is put forward. This is what I think we should do. How do you feel about it? Do you want me to change that in any way? Next stage is to, instead of present the decision, present the problem, the circumstances, the challenge, the developments which require a decision to be made. Seek input from the team, from the staff, and then make the decision. But still, the decision is being made by the leader. Finally, as we move into the join section, here we have the group making the decision. The group is asked to decide either to come up with a completely new solution of their own, or to maybe choose a number of possibilities which are put forward by the leader. But there are set limits. They're not given total freedom to make their own decision. There are limits, maybe guidelines, which restrict what they can decide. And finally, the team itself develops the options and decides on the actions. So decision making is completely devolved to the team. The leader is part of that, but not as somebody who is dictating what the decision should be, but simply another member of the decision making team. And we can characterize this continuum from what we might think of as autocratic through to democratic as manager-centered leadership at the left-hand side, employee-centered leadership at the right-hand side, and we see a balance between the use of authority by the leader, which is 100% at the tell end of this spectrum, and that is offset by the area of freedom for the employees. So as we move along the continuum from tell through sell, consult and finally join, the use of authority by the leader diminishes and the area of freedom, of power, if you like, for the employees increases. So this is where the idea of the continuum comes in, and we can see here on the image the balance between use of authority by the leader, and you've probably come across the idea that true leadership doesn't actually require authority. A manager can impose decisions because of his or her authority as a manager. A leader encourages followers, in this case employees, not by the use of authority but by something else. And we see the development of that something else, the charisma, the inspiration, whatever it might be, as we move along the continuum from tell through sell, consult and to join. There's still the concept of leadership, but the employees have been given more freedom to input into the situation within or underneath that idea of leadership. It's not dictating, it's guiding, encouraging, empowering, which is a very different idea from simply telling people what to do. We can compare this with McGregor's theory of X and Y, which you may have come across in other lectures. Theory X, and remember, theory X and theory Y are based on the manager's perceptions of the staff. It doesn't necessarily follow that the staff are as they are perceived, but in, for example, theory X, the manager, the leader, believes that the staff dislike their work, that they will avoid responsibility and therefore need constant direction. They need control, force and threats in order to deliver work, and they need to be supervised at every step. There's no inherent incentive for them to work, and therefore they need to be enticed by rewards in order to achieve the required goals. In other words, we need a carrot and or stick approach, because we believe, rightly or wrongly, that the employees are basically work shy, and if not pursued at every step, will not actually do anything. On the other hand, theory Y suggests that employees are happy to work on their own initiative. They will be more involved in decision making, they're self-motivated, they take ownership of their work. They seek and accept responsibility and need little direction. Work is viewed as being fulfilling and challenging, and they will solve problems creatively and imaginatively. And again, I emphasize, that is the leader, the manager's perception of the employees, not necessarily what they are. But of course, human nature being what it is, the way in which the employees are treated will to some degree determine how they behave. If you believe that your employees dislike their work, that they avoid responsibility and so on, and that is clear to them in the way that you treat them, it's quite likely that even if they weren't like that in the first place, they will become like that. Conversely, if we have faith in our employees, we believe that they will take ownership, that they will accept responsibility and so on, if we empower them by holding those views of them and their capabilities, it's more likely that they will actually learn to be like that, because it encourages them to be part of the organisation, to input into it, because that input is valued and very often acted upon. So that will encourage them to be creative and imaginative. Because conversely, there's very little point in putting forward creative and imaginative input to a leader who is not going to take any notice of it anyway. And if we are at the use of authority by the leader end of the continuum, that is exactly the kind of scenario in which an employee will find themselves. That their input is not valued other than as a unit of manufacture, and that they have no influence whatsoever on the decision-making process. So this is a two-way process, that if we exhibit confidence in employees, it's more likely that they will justify that confidence by rising to the challenge, by feeling valued, feeling a part of what is going on, and therefore that they are more responsible for their own destiny. It's very simple psychology, but it's not always understood by managers who very often treat employees as if they're simply almost part of the machinery. We need to ask the question, is the situation static or dynamic? In other words, would a leader's position on the continuum be fixed or be variable? Would a given manager always adopt the same approach of telling or consulting or devolving decision-making to the team? It is in fact likely to change. There are some people, some individuals, of course, who will never be anything other than an autocratic leader and who perhaps derive pleasure from the fact that they can simply tell people what to do. But most other managers will exhibit a, perhaps one would hope, more intelligent approach to leadership, and their position on the continuum, they may not of course be aware of the continuum. It doesn't follow that a manager will come into work one day and ask himself, or maybe his colleagues, where should I be on the continuum today? A lot of people will manage and lead having no knowledge whatsoever of any of the models which we use to characterize and describe what they do. But in reality, it is likely that a leader's position on the continuum will change. And it will depend on a number of forces, a number of factors, which we can group into three categories. Forces to be found in the leader themselves, in the employees, and in the situation. If we look at the leader, him or herself, there are a number of forces, a number of factors which will affect their position on the continuum, will affect their tendency to be autocratic, to be somewhere in the middle, or to be totally democratic. Their own values, what they perceive or feel about themselves, their role in the organisation, and so on, will of course colour the way they behave. Nobody can escape that. Our values always affect the way that we behave in certain situations. Previous experiences will affect their tendency to be autocratic, to be open and more discursive, or to be democratic. Have they had good experiences in devolving decision-making to teams, or has that turned out very badly in the past? Do they have confidence in the staff? Can they trust the staff to make decisions, to implement decisions with less guidance, with less detail in the way in which they implement a decision which perhaps the leader has taken or they have taken as a team? What about confidence in themselves? A leader has to be quite confident of themselves and their role in the organisation in order to devolve what many people would see as their job to the team or to the staff. It makes a lot of sense to do it, as we talked about when I discussed or mentioned the advantages of democratic leadership. There are lots of advantages in doing that. But many people will feel that they are handing over control to people that are basically their employees. It takes a certain amount of confidence to do that. Confidence which is not derived from the title on somebody's door that says, I am the executive manager or the chief executive officer or whatever it might be. And in order to maintain my confidence, I'm going to tell everybody what to do. A confident leader doesn't need that kind of reassurance. They are happy to trust their staff to a greater degree because they don't need that status to build their own confidence, because they have innate confidence in themselves. Some people simply like to be leaders, so their leadership inclination will affect the degree to which they're happy to relinquish all the decision making to the team. If some people see themselves as a strong autocratic leader, then they'll find it harder to do that. Other people see being democratic as a sign of strength. It depends on their perception of leadership, their personal inclination to leadership. And it will also depend on their sense of security in uncertain situations, which of course will also depend upon their confidence in the staff, as we said earlier. If the situation is uncertain, it makes it harder perhaps to have a high degree of confidence in the staff. Maybe, on the other hand, they'll feel, well, I don't want to take on all of this responsibility myself, so I will devolve some of it to the staff. So there are a number of forces, a number of factors in the leader themselves which will affect their position on the Tanenbaum and Schmidt continuum. There are forces in the staff as well. Their degree of need for independence. Some individuals strive for independence, for independent control, for influence of the situation. Other people dread being required to make decisions, to take responsibility and so on. Some people simply want to be told what to do. They don't want the responsibility of decision making. Other people, as I say, are completely the opposite. They value independence. Degree of readiness to assume responsibility. That may sound like the same thing, but that is something which can develop over time. Does an individual feel that they have enough experience in that role or that organisation to become responsible for decisions taken that may affect themselves and other people within their team? Degree of tolerance of ambiguity is another important aspect, which is similar to the first point I made about whether somebody wants to be told what to do or to attempt to make a decision themselves. Some people have a high tolerance of ambiguity, of uncertainty, and find that a challenge. They find it something interesting, a challenge they wish to rise to. Others really dislike that kind of thing and want a high degree of clarity. Their interest in the problem will affect their desire to be involved in resolving the problem. Some people's attitude would be simply, just let me get on with my part of the job, don't bother me with these bigger problems. You make the decision, that's your job, you're the manager. I'm more interested in how I execute that decision. So interest in the problem is one of the forces in the staff. Do the staff identify with organisational goals? Or are they simply more interested in doing their work and collecting a pay packet at the end of the week? Again, if the latter is the case, that their motivation is simply, I do the job and I get rewarded for it, then maybe they're not particularly interested in worrying about higher organisational decisions and goals. Do they have a level of knowledge and expertise which actually equips them to be involved in decision making? Maybe they don't. Maybe it would be unwise to have staff who don't have that level of knowledge and expertise contributing to important decisions. And finally, what is their expectation of sharing in decision making? Again, it's another, if we like, another view of the same thing. As an individual, does a member of the team, a member of the staff, actually expect to be called upon or to be given the opportunity to take part in decision making? Depends a lot on what kind of job they're doing. If they feel that they're qualified and experienced and intelligent, perhaps, or some combination of those things, yeah, they may have a high expectation of taking part in decision making and may feel undervalued and somewhat rejected if they don't have a share in decision making. Finally, there are the forces in the situation. The type of organisation will, to some degree, determine what position a leader takes on the continuum. You could take two extremes, perhaps. In the armed forces, we have a very clear hierarchical structure of command, and decisions are taken higher up in that structure, and instructions are issued to people lower down. And the people lower down probably have very little expectation of taking part in decision making. On the other hand, a creative organisation, Google might be one of them, an advertising company, somewhere where people are asked to be free-thinking and creative and novel, then yes, you'd probably expect more people to have an input into decisions which are made. You might expect more arguments and discussions about things, but if you approach that in a hierarchical way, then it's unlikely that you will get effective decisions in that type of organisation. The effectiveness of the group, of course, will also have an effect. And that would be connected with the idea of situational leadership, which you may have come across or will come across, where the leadership style evolves as a group develops in their knowledge and efficiency of tackling a particular type of situation. If a group or team is newly formed or hasn't encountered the kind of challenges that it's meeting at the moment before, then they probably need a rather more autocratic than democratic leadership to tackle problems with which they're neither familiar nor skilled at resolving. But as their effectiveness increases, then the leadership style can change into one which eventually simply empowers them to solve the problems themselves. That's only when the group effectiveness has actually been established and probably demonstrated. The nature of the problem may determine the point on the leadership continuum. Some problems can be sensibly dealt with by the team. Others, particularly if they involve difficult outcomes, maybe reducing the number of staff, reducing the number of products, cancelling certain projects or whatever, they may not be easily devolved to a team. They might be, but maybe that's the kind of decision that has to be taken higher up in the organisation and accepted by the people who it disadvantages. Pressure of time is another factor. If a rapid decision is required, it's more likely to be achieved by a less democratic approach. Sometimes urgency requires quick decisions, and quick decisions are not often achieved by devolving the decision to a large team of people. You may get a better decision by devolving the problem, being democratic about it, but a better decision made too late is often not as good as a bad or less good decision made on time. So pressure of time will change the position on the continuum. So, in summary, the Tanenbaum and Schmidt continuum expands the autocratic versus democratic model to better reflect real life. Real life is rarely as black and white as autocratic versus democratic. The continuum reflects that and allows for a greater shade of meaning, a longer spectrum of types of decision making. The leader's position on that continuum is unlikely to be fixed. The only time really that it's likely to be fixed, in my opinion, is if you have a dyed-in-the-wool autocrat who sees no reason for being in any way democratic, and maybe they will never be dissuaded from residing at the autocratic end of the continuum. And finally, we've considered the various forces that affect the position on the continuum. And in most cases that position will change depending on the situation, the staff, the kind of problem, the kind of decision that is necessary to be made at the time. It's worth pointing out that this kind of content is tested in the Aberystwyth University entrance exam, as it would be in many other universities' entrance exams, and that if you successfully complete an exam, there are multiple points in the year and you can take it in a subject you're best at, you can earn yourself an unconditional or a reduced offer for the business school. More details can be found at the end of that rather long link, and I thank you for listening to this and I wish you all the best in your studies. Thank you very much.